Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive?
Absolutely. Always ready to explore.
Well, today we're heading to Rio.
Oh, Rio.
Yeah, but not for the beaches or carnival. We're going deep into the favelas where faith and organized crime have this really strange and fascinating relationship.
I'm intrigued already.
You might have heard about the Pure Third Command gang.
Vaguely rings a bell. They're the ones who use the Star of David as, like, their logo.
Exactly. They stamp it on their cocaine and marijuana, which seems, well, kind of out of place, you know?
Yeah, it's not the typical branding you'd expect from a drug gang.
But get this, it's not random at all. It's tied directly to their very unique version of Pentecostalism.
So they're like religious drug lords.
In a way, yeah. They control these 5 favelas in Rio. They call it the Israel Complex.
Israel Complex. That's a loaded name.
Yeah, and it gets even wilder. They believe that the return of Jews to Israel means, second coming of Christ is right around the corner. And guess what? They see themselves as like soldiers of crime working for Jesus.
Okay, hold on. There's a lot to unpack.
Yeah.
So we're talking about gangsters who think they're doing God's work by selling drugs and controlling territory.
That's the gist of it, yeah. And they're not just a small-time operation either. They're a major player in Rio's underworld. Some researchers have even coined this term Narco-Pentecostalism to describe this phenomenon.
Narco-Pentecostalism, huh? I mean, that really says it all, doesn't it? Sounds like something straight out of, like, a dystopian novel.
Yeah, it's pretty intense. But to really grasp this whole thing, I think a real-life story might help. Have you heard of Pastor Diego Nascimento?
Nascimento. Can't say that I have.
So he used to be a member of the Red Command.
The Red Command.
Yeah.
One of Rio's most notorious gangs, right? Yeah, I know about them.
Yeah, he spent years in prison for drug dealing, struggled with crack cocaine addiction, the whole 9 yards.
Sounds like he was deep in that life.
Deep, yeah. But then something pretty incredible happened. So he gets called in by this well-known drug dealer in his favela.
Okay, so I'm thinking this is where it gets even darker, right? Like, another job, more trouble.
You'd think so, right? But no, this dealer had something else in mind entirely. He basically, he preached the gospel to Nascimento.
Yeah. A drug dealer turned preacher. Okay, now I've heard it all.
Right. And get this, it was at gunpoint.
At gunpoint. Wow, okay. That's a new one.
Yeah, talk about a captive audience, right. But here's the thing. This bizarre encounter was a turning point for Nascimento. It led him to convert to Christianity. And eventually, he actually became a pastor himself.
I'm speechless. So he went from prison and addiction to leading a church. That's a pretty dramatic transformation.
It's a real testament to the power of, faith and redemption, I guess, even in a place as rough as the favelas.
I mean, it makes you wonder, right, about second chances and the possibility of change,
Yeah.
even in the darkest of circumstances.
Absolutely. And now, Pastor Nascimento, he works in prisons, using his past to help others, to help them find a way out of the life he once lived.
Wow. That's really coming full circle, isn't it? From gangster to inmate to pastor, working with those who are still trapped in that cycle.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable. But what I find really interesting is that despite his own conversion story coming from, a criminal, Pastor Nascimento, he believes that real faith and a life of crime, they don't mix.
So he sees those gangsters who claim to be religious as like hypocrites, faking it?
Well, he doesn't use that word exactly, but he thinks they're more driven by fear or a desire for power than genuine belief.
That's a really interesting perspective. I mean, it adds another layer of complexity to this whole Narco-Pentecostalism thing, doesn't it?
Definitely. It makes you question what's really going on in their heads, their motivations, and how they can reconcile their beliefs with their actions, especially when you consider how much influence evangelical Christianity has in Brazil these days.
Yeah, it's growing rapidly, isn't it? I read somewhere that it's on track to maybe even surpass Catholicism as the dominant religion in Brazil, like by the end of this decade.
Right. And that growth is particularly strong in the favelas where, people are often looking for hope and a sense of community.
I can see how that would be appealing in those environments for sure. But it also raises some concerns, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. One of the biggest worries is the impact it's having on Afro-Brazilian faiths, like Umbanda and Candomblé.
Oh, yeah. Those religions are deeply rooted in Brazilian culture, but they've been facing a lot of pressure lately, right? especially in areas where these gangs, like the Pure Third Command, have a strong presence.
So are you saying these gangs are actually trying to shut down these other religions?
That's what we're seeing, yeah. There are reports of violence, intimidation tactics, even Candomblé and Umbanda houses being forced to close down.
Wow, so it's like they're imposing their own religious beliefs on everyone else. That's pretty messed up.
Yeah, it creates a really unsettling climate. I spoke with Professor Christina Vidal. She's a sociologist who studies these communities, and she describes a real sense of fear in places like the Israel complex. People are afraid to openly practice anything other than the gang's approved religion.
It's like a micro-theocracy within these favelas where one group dictates everyone's spiritual life. It's kind of chilling when you think about it.
It is. And it's not just limited to the Israel complex either. Professor Vidal told me about Umbanda and Candomblé houses being shut down in surrounding neighborhoods as well.
So it's spreading.
Seems like it. And often, these threatening messages are left behind. Like Jesus is the Lord of this place, that kind of thing. It's a very clear message about who's in control and what they expect.
Man, that's heavy. I mean, what are the authorities doing about this? Are they stepping in to protect these people's right to practice their religion?
They're trying, but it's a very complicated situation. I talked to Dr. Rita Salim. She heads the Rio Police Department for racial and intolerance crimes, and she emphasized how, threats from groups like the Pure Third Command, they carry a lot of weight because people know they're backed up by violence.
So it's not just empty threats, it's a real danger.
Exactly. In fact, there's even an arrest warrant out for the supposed leader of the Israel complex because he allegedly ordered an attack on an Afro-Brazilian temple in another favela.
Jeez. That's taking it to a whole new level.
Yeah, it really highlights how seriously these gangs are involved in this religious persecution.
And I'm guessing this isn't just a Rio problem, right? I was reading that it's becoming an issue across Brazil.
That's what Marcio Dichagun believes, at least. He coordinates religious diversity at Rio City Hall, and he thinks this is spreading nationwide.
So it's going beyond the favelas.
It seems so, yeah. And Jagun, who, by the way, is a high priest in the Candomblé religion himself, he sees these attacks as and I'm quoting him here, a neo-crusade, driven by prejudice and this desire to demonize African religions.
Neo-crusade, that's a pretty loaded term.
It is, but given what's happening, the targeted attacks on Candomblé and Umbanda, it's hard to argue with that assessment. It brings up all these historical tensions and how they can, resurface in these new and really disturbing ways.
It's like history repeating itself, but with a modern twist. And speaking of terms, there seems to be some debate about how to best describe this mixing of religion and crime in Brazil. Some use Narco-Pentecostalism, while others prefer narco-religiosity, which kind of broadens the historical context,
Yeah, that's an important distinction. The thing is, the relationship between religion and crime in Brazil, it has deep roots. We're talking centuries of gangsters seeking protection and legitimacy from various deities and saints, drawing from Catholicism and Afro-Brazilian faiths all mixed together.
So it's like a cultural tapestry of beliefs with crime woven right into it.
Exactly. And by understanding that history, we can start to really grasp what's happening in Rio's favelas today. It's not just about turf wars and drugs. It's about a struggle for the hearts and minds of the people, a battle over the very right to practice one's faith without fear.
It's a battle for religious freedom. Right?
Exactly. A fundamental right that's being threatened in a way that most people probably never imagined. And that really brings us to a crucial point. This whole fusion of faith and criminality, it's really jeopardizing something fundamental in Brazil.
What do you mean?
I mean, their constitution, right? It guarantees religious freedom, and this is straight up undermining that.
Right. It's it's not just the violence and drugs, it's this added layer of control. They're dictating what people can and cannot believe.
Exactly. They're inflicting harm on a whole other level. It really makes you think, though, right? If religion could be used as this tool for control, can it also be a force for positive change? I mean, especially in these communities that are, struggling with so much.
It's a good question. I mean, we just heard about Pastor Nascimento, right? His life was completely turned around because of faith. But then we're also seeing these twisted beliefs being used to justify some pretty awful things.
It's a real double-edged sword, isn't it? The power of belief, I mean, it can uplift and inspire, but it can also be, manipulated and distorted to serve some pretty dark purposes.
And the impact, it goes way beyond just the individuals involved, right? It creates this climate of fear and intolerance that affects the whole community.
Absolutely. It's a stark reminder that this battle for hearts and minds, it can happen anywhere,
Right.
even in the shadow of Christ the Redeemer, which is, well, it's supposed to be this symbol of hope and redemption.
Yeah, but the reality in the favelas is, well, it's a lot different. It's a complex, unsettling, full of contradictions. I mean, what does this mean for the future of religious freedom in Brazil? How do these communities even begin to resist this kind of extremism?
Tough questions for sure. I mean, we can't ignore what's happening. It's easy to get caught up in the, I don't know, like the sensational aspects of this whole thing, but we have to remember the human cost.
Real people are being affected, deeply affected by this conflict.
Right. Their voices deserve to be heard. Their stories need to be told.
Exactly. And by shedding light on it, maybe, just maybe, we can help people understand this complicated relationship between religion, crime, and power in the favelas.
Maybe even spark some much needed dialogue and action. Because let's be honest, this isn't just a Rio problem.
No, you're right. It's a human rights issue, a social justice issue. It's about the right to believe, the right to practice your faith without being afraid.
Absolutely. It's a universal story, even though the setting is, well, it's pretty unique. So as we wrap up our deep dive into this challenging topic, I want to leave you with one final thought, something to really ponder.
Okay, I'm listening.
If religious conversion can lead someone away from a life of crime, can religious extremism also be a driving force in perpetuating violence and control?
Wow, that's a powerful question.
And what does that tell us about the power of belief systems? The responsibility that comes with them.
It really highlights how faith can be both good and bad, doesn't it?
Exactly. It challenges us to really think critically about the role of belief, not just in these communities, but in our own lives as well.
It really makes you think, right, about how belief can be like this double-edged sword.
Yeah, definitely. It's a reminder to always, be critical, to really examine how these belief systems, how they affect people, how they affect society as a whole. We can't just take things at face value.
We've been exploring this world, this narco-religiosity, as they call it.
Yeah, where faith and, well, organized crime, they become like intertwined, inseparable in these Rio favelas.
It's a story like full of these contradictions, gangsters. They're seeking divine protection. People are finding religion amidst all this violence. And then you have these other faiths being suppressed, all in the name of, well, another religion.
It's like this microcosm of a bigger struggle, right, between tolerance and extremism.
Yeah.
The struggle has been going on for, well, centuries, really.
You've heard about the Pure Third Command, this gang with their, unique brand of Pentecostalism. They're gangsters, but they also see themselves as like religious warriors.
And we heard about Pastor Nascimento, whose life took this incredible turn from a gangster to, well, a pastor.
And we talked about how people are fighting for their right to religious freedom against all odds.
And we can't forget the historical context. This relationship between religion and crime in Brazil, it didn't just appear overnight. It's got deep roots. It's like this complex mix of faith, power, and just survival in these communities that have been marginalized for so long.
It's a glimpse into a world that most people, well, they only see in the headlines. But thanks to these researchers and theologians and even, former gangsters, we're getting a better understanding of what's really happening in these favelas.
And hopefully, by, sharing this knowledge, we can contribute to a more informed discussion about this whole thing, about faith and crime, not just in Brazil, but everywhere. Because these questions, they're relevant to all of us.
Absolutely. They're about human rights. They're about social justice. They're about the very core of belief itself. So to everyone listening, thank you for joining us on this journey.
It's been quite a deep dive exploring this complex world of narco-religiosity.
We hope it's made you curious, challenged your assumptions, and, well, maybe given you a better understanding of this fascinating and honestly pretty troubling topic.
And until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep.
And remember, there's always more to uncover.